You ever wonder why INFJs feel so out of place in modern society, but would probably be total rock stars in a toga 2,000 years ago? Yeah, me too. Turns out, the world may have caught up with smartphones, dating apps, and coffee shops that sell oat milk for $9. But emotionally, spiritually, existentially, we're still living in Plato's cave, and INFJs, they've been sitting by the fire staring at the wall, whispering, "It's all an illusion," since birth. Today I'm going to walk you through 9 INFJ personality traits, but with a twist, every single one backed by the wisdom of ancient philosophers. Socrates, Marcus Aurelius, Confucius, you name it. Because maybe, just maybe, INFJs aren't too sensitive, too deep, or too quiet. Maybe they're just ancient souls in modern bodies. Let's dive right in. All right, first on the list, the Stoic silence. Why INFJs speak less but mean more. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Now, if that doesn't sound like an INFJ's life motto, I don't know what does. INFJs don't just talk, they calculate. Every word that leaves their mouth has already survived an internal filter more intense than airport security. While most people are thinking, "What should I say?" INFJs are thinking, "What's the point of saying anything at all if it won't help someone grow, reflect, or change the fate of their entire family line?" You ever notice how INFJs will sit through an entire meeting in total silence, only to drop one perfectly crafted sentence that makes everyone reevaluate their life choices? That's not an accident. That's a strategy. They observe first. Always. While the rest of the room is performing emotional karaoke, the INFJ is mentally building a psychological profile on everyone, complete with timestamps, motives, and hidden trauma. And then, when they finally do speak, it's like watching a sniper take a shot. One sentence. Direct hit. Silence. Boom. The room goes quiet, not because of the fun they shouted, but because they just said what everyone else was thinking, but didn't have the emotional vocabulary or moral clarity to express. It's not that INFJs are quiet. It's that they've realized most conversations are just noise with punctuation. They're not trying to be mysterious. They're just allergic to superficiality. You ask them how their day is, and they'll say fine, but ask them about the metaphysical implications of unspoken expectations in modern relationships, and suddenly it's a TED Talk in your kitchen. The Stoics believed in restraint, intention, and virtue over volume. INFJs embody that. They don't speak to be heard, they speak to be understood. And often that means staying silent until what they say actually matters. So the next time an INFJ is quiet, don't assume they have nothing to say. Assume they're deciding whether it's worth reshaping your worldview today, or if you need one more day of blissful ignorance. And let's be honest, most of us probably do. And next up, Plato's cave and the INFJ's inner world. Imagine you've spent your whole life in a cave, staring at shadows on the wall. That's Plato's allegory. It's philosophy's way of saying most people think they're seeing the truth, but really, they're just watching the emotional Netflix of their limited perception. Now picture an INFJ in that cave. While everyone else is rating the shadow puppets out of 5 stars, the INFJ is standing in the back, squinting, going, "Yeah, this feels fake." There's a whole other world out there, isn't there? See, INFJs don't just see the world, they sense it. They live in a constant state of double awareness, reality on the surface, and then the truth underneath. They know when someone's smile is actually a scream. They know when a relationship is dying, before the other person even realizes they're unhappy. This intuitive X-ray vision, it's powerful. But also kind of a curse, because when you see beneath the illusion, it's hard to pretend the shadows are satisfying anymore. And when INFJs do leave the cave, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, they try to come back and tell people, hey, there's more. There's light. There's depth. And what happens? People squint at them like they're crazy and say, okay, but like, are you coming to brunch or not? The INFJ experiences this paradox. You see so much, you feel so deeply, but you often have no one to share it with. Because you're not just out of the cave, you're living outside of time. And while others are focused on what's trending, INFJs are out here wondering why no one's talking about existential dread, emotional trauma cycles, or the spiritual consequences of ghosting. This is why INFJs get labeled as too intense, too philosophical, or too serious. It's not that they don't enjoy fun. It's that they're aware even fun has layers. The party isn't just a party, it's a coping mechanism. The silence isn't just silence, it's a mirror. And here's the real kicker. INFJs don't judge people for watching shadows. They just hope one day someone might look back at them and ask, what's outside the cave? And when that happens, when someone actually wants to know, that's when the INFJ smiles. Because finally someone sees them, not just the mask, but the mind behind it. And thirdly, the INFJ curse, knowing too much, too soon. Heraclitus said, character is destiny. But INFJs don't need a quote to understand that. They live it. While most people need months, even years, to figure someone out, INFJs get the emotional blueprint before you finish your second sentence. It's not magic. It's intuition wired with hyper-observation, emotional memory, and a silent inner monologue that basically says, something's off. You might call it a gift, but let's not romanticize it. It's more like having the director's cut of everyone's life, including all the deleted scenes nobody wants you to see. While you're out here enjoying the surface-level version of someone, the INFJ already knows where the plot holes are, and that's not easy, because knowing too much too early means carrying the weight of unspoken truths, sometimes for years, while everyone else is still playing pretend. This is the INFJ curse. They sense betrayal before it happens. They feel the tension in a friendship while the other person is still smiling. And even when they don't want to know, they still know. Their brain doesn't wait for proof. It runs a full background check based on your tone of voice, facial micro-expressions, and the exact way you pause before saying, I'm fine. It's not about judgment, it's about clarity. And unfortunately, clarity isn't always comforting, because when an INFJ sees the true version of someone and realizes that person has no idea who they even are, it creates this impossible dilemma. Do you say something and risk pushing them away, or do you stay quiet and carry it alone? So most INFJs stay quiet. They observe, they journal, they internalize until it starts to weigh on them. That's why they burn out in social settings that seem totally normal to everyone else. While others are just catching up, the INFJ is decoding family trauma over appetizers. And yes, this makes INFJs seem distant, mysterious, even cold. But the truth is, they've just seen too much, too fast, for too long. So if an INFJ seems tired around you, it's not because they're bored. It's because they already know the emotional ending of this conversation. And they're deciding whether to stay for the credits. Fourthly, Socrates' INFJ energy questioned everything. Socrates was famously annoying. Not because he was wrong, but because he refused to accept surface-level answers. He would ask, why? Repeatedly, peeling back layers of assumptions until the person talking either had a profound realization or an existential crisis. And honestly, that's exactly the INFJ conversation style. It's not small talk, it's psychological excavation. Most people say things like, yeah, I'm good. An INFJ hears that and immediately thinks, okay, but why did your voice drop half a tone? Why did your eyes shift to the left? Why did you inhale before speaking like you were buffering? They don't take words at face value. They read the emotional operating system behind them. This is why INFJs often get labeled as intense. They don't mean to be. It's just that they're allergic to superficiality. They don't care about the weather unless the weather is a metaphor for your childhood coping mechanisms. They don't just want to know what you feel. They want to know the architecture of the emotion, the origin story, the psychological lineage. And like Socrates, INFJs are not doing this to win. They're doing it to understand. They want authenticity, depth, the real thing. It's why they can't stand conversations that exist only to fill silence. Silence is sacred to them. Silence is where truth lives. So if they're speaking, it's because something meaningful is happening or needs to happen. But here's the downside. When you spend your life questioning everything, you start questioning yourself too. INFJs don't just analyze others, they interrogate their own beliefs, motives, and emotional responses with the same intensity. Their introspection can feel like being both the therapist and the patient in the same session, every day, forever. This level of reflection makes INFJs wise, but also exhausted. Because while everyone else is content with the first answer, INFJs are still digging for the origin beneath the origin. They want the truth behind the truth, and when they find it, it changes them, even if no one else ever sees what they've seen. So yes, INFJs question everything, not to complicate life, but to understand it, not to be difficult, but to be real. They're not trying to break reality apart. They're trying to find where it actually begins. Fifthly, Confucius was the OG INFJ harmony over victory. Confucius once said, "The noble-minded are calm and steady. The small-minded are forever fussing and fretting." If that doesn't sound like your average INFJ at a family dinner, I don't know what does. INFJs don't want to win the argument. They want to win the balance. And if that means letting you believe you're right while they sip tea and emotionally disengage, so be it. You see, INFJs don't operate on ego. They operate on harmony. They're not the type to storm out of a room screaming. They're the type to lower their voice, raise their standards, and never speak to you again, politely. While other types crave the last word, INFJs crave emotional resolution. But not just any resolution, the kind where everyone grows, learns, and hugs it out afterward. Unrealistic? Maybe. But they still hope. It's not that they can't fight, it's that they won't, unless you corner them. INFJs will absorb tension for weeks, months, sometimes years, just to preserve peace. But when they snap, it's not loud, it's biblical. They'll lay out every time they forgave you, every micro-disrespect, every suppressed gut feeling, and they'll do it with the tone of a disappointed spiritual guide. You won't even know you're in trouble until you're halfway through a "we need to talk" message that reads like an ancient scroll. INFJs believe that peace is a moral responsibility. They want people to get along, not because they're passive, but because they understand the emotional damage of conflict. They know what it's like to carry emotional baggage for years, and they don't want that for anyone else. So they choose compassion over conquest, understanding over ego, and resolution over retaliation. But don't confuse peacekeeping with weakness. INFJs will cut you off with the same gentleness they once used to support you. And when they go quiet, it's not silence. It's closure. They don't need to destroy you. They just need to reclaim themselves. Quietly, gracefully, completely. Sixthly, INFJs and the burden of knowing what others feel. Lao Tzu said, "Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom." But INFJs, they accidentally do both before breakfast. And it's not even intentional. It's like their brain comes pre-installed with emotional Wi-Fi. And the password is always your unspoken feelings. And they don't ask, "Are you okay?" Because they want to make conversation. They ask because your energy dipped 0.3 decibels when you said, "I'm fine." And now their emotional radar is going off like a fire alarm in a candle shop. Empathy for INFJs isn't optional. It's the default setting. They feel your sadness like it's theirs, your joy like a mirror, your anxiety like secondhand caffeine. They walk into a room and feel everything, the tension between two coworkers, the heartbreak behind someone's smile, the existential despair hiding behind a joke. And while the rest of the world is just vibing, the INFJ is picking up emotional residue like a psychic housekeeper. But here's where it gets complicated. INFJs are so busy managing other people's emotional messes that they forget they have their own. It's like being the therapist for a friend group that doesn't even know you cry during cereal commercials. And eventually, that emotional saturation builds up. INFJs don't explode. They implode, quietly, gracefully, and with a playlist of melancholic indie music playing in the background. That's why they disappear. It's not personal. It's not a drama. It's not even avoidance. It's survival. They need to be alone to recharge, not just because they're introverts, but because solitude is the only time their emotions aren't competing with everyone else's. And yes, this makes INFJs seem distant or hard to read, but the truth is they're not unreadable. They're just protecting you from how much they've already read about you, because empathy without boundaries becomes emotional erosion. And INFJs, they've spent years learning the difference between caring deeply and carrying people. So if an INFJ loves you but takes space, let them. It means they're trying to keep both of you whole, because feeling everything is a gift, but only if you learn when to set it down. And seventhly, the INFJ's hidden rage echoing Epictetus. Epictetus, the ancient Stoic philosopher, said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master," which sounds nice, until you realize INFJs are walking pressure cookers with a PhD in suppression. You think they're calm, collected, maybe even soft, but deep down, they're managing a quiet civil war between their idealism and everyone else's nonsense. You see, INFJs hate conflict, not because they're afraid of it, but because they feel it on a cellular level. Even passive-aggressive tension in a group chat can ruin their whole day. So instead of reacting, they do what INFJs do best. They absorb it again and again and again. Until suddenly, one day, they hit emotional saturation and snap. But INFJ rage isn't like other rage. There's no screaming, no flying dishes, no public spectacle. It's calculated, surgical, like getting fired from your therapist in a handwritten letter that includes footnotes and emotional timestamps. When an INFJ reaches their breaking point, it's not a tantrum, it's a reckoning. They won't yell, they'll withdraw, not because they're punishing you, but because they've already had the entire argument in their head 46 times with flowcharts and character arcs. And here's the twist. INFJs aren't angry because they're easily offended. They're angry because their core values have been violated, overlooked, mocked. Their rage isn't petty, it's sacred. It's the natural consequence of watching people ignore boundaries they never voiced because they were too busy making room for yours. They gave grace, they gave silence, they gave the benefit of the doubt until there was none left to give. And when that reservoir runs dry, you'll feel the shift. They don't storm out, they vanish. No confrontation, just distance. Cold, respectful, and irreversible. Because INFJs don't enjoy conflict, but they know that peace without self-respect isn't peace at all. It's emotional surrender. And they didn't come this far just to betray themselves for the sake of keeping the room comfortable. So, if an INFJ ever gets angry with you, pay attention. Because they didn't just reach their limit, they redefined it. Eighthly, why Aristotle would say INFJs are dangerous. Aristotle was obsessed with balance, the golden mean, the idea that virtue lives in moderation. But INFJs, yeah, they don't do moderation. They do intensity. Quiet, thoughtful, soft-spoken intensity that builds until one day it reshapes the entire room. INFJs aren't dangerous in the way people usually think. They're not impulsive or loud or chaotic. They're dangerous because they believe in idealism. They don't just want things to be good, they want them to be true, just, pure. And that's where the trouble starts. Because the world, it's rarely those things. It's messy, it's dishonest, it's noisy and shallow, and often rewards exactly the kind of behavior INFJs despise. So, what happens when someone who sees the best of what humanity could be is constantly confronted with the worst of what it is? They snap, quietly, elegantly, philosophically, with better grammar than you. This is where INFJs go from soft-hearted empaths to silent revolutionaries. When their ideals are betrayed, whether by people, systems, or their own expectations, they don't lash out. They restructure. You won't even know they've changed until they show up 6 months later with new boundaries, new values, and the kind of stare that says, "I've burned the old version of me, and she left instructions not to let you back in." INFJs go all in on people, on ideas, on love. And when it breaks, they don't just mourn, they evolve. And that evolution can be intimidating, because while most people bounce back, INFJs transcend. They turn disappointment into doctrine. They turn heartbreak into standards, and they do it so quietly you'll wonder if you were ever part of their life at all, or just a chapter they rewrote after editing out the parts that didn't align. Aristotle warned against extremes, but what he didn't account for was the INFJ's ability to make even extremism look graceful. Because when an INFJ gives up on trying to fix the world, they don't fall apart. They become the world they wish existed. And that kind of silent, principled, no longer interested in your BS transformation, that's not just rare. That's revolutionary. Last but not least, you are the philosopher. Let's get one thing straight. If you're an INFJ, you weren't made to fit in. You were made to see through the noise, through the masks, through the polished, perfectly filtered versions of reality that most people spend their whole lives defending. You were made for something deeper, and let's be honest, it probably makes you feel like an alien in your own timeline. But here's the plot twist. You're not broken. You're built different. You don't just feel emotions. You dissect them. You don't just listen. You absorb. You don't just hope. You believe, sometimes to your own emotional detriment. And that level of internal richness, that's what ancient philosophers were trying to bottle, because if Socrates was the questioner, and Marcus Aurelius was the quiet observer, and Lao Tzu was the soul whisperer, then guess what? You're all of them, in a hoodie, reading people at parties, silently wishing you were home journaling instead. INFJs are walking contradictions, deeply empathetic, yet emotionally guarded, private, but profoundly open to understanding others, dreamers who notice everything. You don't just want to live, you want to mean something. And in a world built for speed, noise, and surface-level interaction, that depth is practically revolutionary. You're the philosopher at the party nobody realizes they're quoting. You're the calm in the chaos, the storm behind the smile, the mirror people avoid when they're not ready to be honest with themselves. And the truth is, most of the world isn't ready for you, but the ones who are, they'll never forget you. So, if you ever feel misunderstood, out of place, or too much, remember this. Maybe you're not here to fit into the crowd. Maybe you're here to remind the crowd of what it means to be real. You are the philosopher. Not with a robe and scrolls, but with intuition, insight, and the quiet strength to keep believing in something better, even if you're the only one who can see it. If this resonated with you, don't just like the video. Share it with someone who thinks being sensitive is a flaw. Drop a comment below. Which philosopher do you secretly relate to? And remember, you're not misunderstood. You're just speaking in a language only the wise will understand. And I see you in the next one.